Welcome to Miss V, the Storyteller podcast. I know you get sick of me saying this, but I am so excited about the guests that I have on my show. And today I have a return guest. Michelle was on my show maybe a year ago or something, and we had such a good time. She has a podcast as well as me, and I've been on her podcast, and I wanted her to come back and be on the podcast because so much has changed in her life, but her story is still so powerful. And you know how I feel about stories. So, Michelle is going to tell us a little bit about herself, and then we'll get into some stories.
Hi, Miss V. Thank you for having me back on the show. I'm so excited to share my story with your listeners. I am Michelle Hall. I am the owner and founder of the Esteemed Life, LLC, which is a personal development company where I work with women survivors of childhood sexual abuse. And excitingly enough, I just gone full time in my business. I was running it part time and I just recently started full time. So I'm excited about that. I'm an author. I have contributed to two anthologies, Living in the Key of Joy, Volume 3 and Volume 4. And I just did a new thing also. I started my e-commerce store, the Esteemed Shop, that sells inspirational products and things of that nature. So I'm excited about that. So that's a little bit about me.
Yes, yes, yes. And Michelle, the shirts that she has are beautiful. I ordered mine. I did. I ordered my shirt. So you all know how I feel about stories and how stories have the power and the potential to change lives. And I think the more we share of our stories, the more that we can help people. God put us on the earth to serve and to help people. So one of the ways we can do it is simply by sharing a story of
Mhm.
something that happened to you and how you made it through that. And that's what this podcast is about. It's simply about coming on, women sharing our stories, how we've overcome things, how we can uplift and empower people. So, with that said, Michelle, go ahead and share your story with us.
Okay, well, I want to share a story about it's actually a longer story, but I'm not going to take the long route. But it's a story about how my undealt with childhood trauma led me to where I am now. So when I was a kid, around the age 10, I was sexually abused by two family members. And that was a devastating event for me in my life. And it's something that I never told anybody about until here in our past recent years. And that really had a huge effect on my self-esteem. Now, even prior to that, I had some things in my life, some hardships and some traumas that I had dealt with. One thing that I dealt with was not knowing who my father is, and that left a huge void for me. At that time, I didn't have a word for it, but I guess I felt a sense of abandonment by not knowing who this person was. And I struggled with how can I feel abandoned when I never knew the person, but that's a whole thing. And then I was also born with a birth defect in my right eye. So I had like a droopy eyelid, like a lazy eye. And from your own experience that kids can be very mean and cruel. And so I got picked on and bullied about that in school. And that can have a blow on your self-esteem. So even before the sexual abuse happened, I had already had some things take place that had already started to affect my self-esteem. And then when that happened, it was like, what else? And so, that was a very pivotal moment for me, that experience. And with that, I'm the type of person that internalizes things. I didn't feel like I had an outlet. So I
Mhm.
just kept everything inside. And I, went on through life and tried to pretend like stuff didn't bother me, that I wasn't hurting on the inside and those types of things. And never really dealt with it. And even as I, became grown, I got married at 21, and there was even more hurt as a grown woman, one of which I don't really talk about a whole lot, but I was literally left at the altar on my wedding day, and ended up marrying this man 2 days later. So, and then there's a whole story with that. That's another story for another podcast. So there was hurt there even as a grown woman. And yeah, so that was that. And I internalized that because that was how I dealt with things. I just didn't. And so I just stuffed things down, stuffed the hurt down and all of that. And to make a long story short, it came to a point to where the burden was too heavy.
Mm-hmm.
It was too heavy for me to deal with on my own any further. And I got to a point, honestly, to where I felt like I was going to have a nervous breakdown,
Mm-hmm.
and I just could not deal with it. And, I still at that time had not told anyone about the sexual abuse. I was still married at that time. And I finally told my husband what had happened. And he was very supportive in me getting into counseling.
Mm-hmm.
And I was so very thankful for that. And I was a Christian at that time as well. And oftentimes when we get into trauma or trouble is when we lean in, more into our faith.
Mm-hmm.
And I did that as well, and it brought me closer to the Lord. And with faith, with prayer,
Mm-hmm.
with counseling, I was really able to go through the process that I needed to go through and get on the other side of all of that hurt and trauma and pain. And I I'll I think I'll stop here because I know we're going to talk about some of the healing stuff. So I'll stop there, and we can get into more of it as we move forward.
Well, yeah, I'm glad you shared that portion of your story because I know, of course, more about the story. But as you were talking, I was thinking about my journey and what happened with me, which is kind of similar with my losing my voice and not talking and all the things that happen when you make a choice not to talk. You
Mm-hmm.
take away your voice, you lose your self-esteem. And I lost all of that.
Mm-hmm.
I became a Christian and God gave me my voice back, but I never dealt with any of the things that I went through, the traumas that I went through, the bullying situation of physically being bullied, the trauma of things that went on in my home. I never dealt with that. But then when I went into the world, because in my story I share about, I thought that when I became an adult, I graduated from high school, that things were going to be better. Ended up adults were just as mean as my teenage classmates and everything, and having to deal with all of that. And one day I was in my car and I was driving. I'm single. I had gotten my own apartment. I'm trying to pay all my bills. I'm at a job where I'm having issues on my job because I hadn't dealt with some issues. So I brought some baggage with me everywhere that I went, and I was driving home from work and I was bawling. I mean, I was bawling. I literally felt like, those containers that you see on the ports,
Mm-hmm.
those great big containers that the trains, move from one place to another. I
Yeah.
felt like one had just literally dropped on my shoulders. That's how heavy and weighed down that I felt. And
Mm-hmm.
I was like crying. My church kept advertising about counseling.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, Black people don't go to no therapy and no counseling. What are you talking about? But my church was talking about it. And
Mm-hmm.
they kept having people who had gone to therapy. They were interviewing them and doing little snippets before the service. And this one lady, she kept coming up there talking about she went to therapy and how happy she was and she glad. And I said to myself, I want to be like her. So, because she kept coming up there, they kept showing her over and over again. And I know I believe God was going to keep showing this woman until I said, you need to go therapy because God knew what I needed. And
Yes.
so finally, that day that I was crying and broke down, that lady, I'm telling you, her face came before me. And I was like, I'm going to be like her.
Mm-hmm.
So I made an appointment. The thing about the therapy counseling at our church is it was people who went to the same church as I. I was
Mm-hmm.
like, I am not. Because if
Right.
you see me in the hallway, you're gonna know my personal business and I'm gonna feel a
Exactly.
certain way. I
Exactly.
looked and I looked and I found someone who I never saw. She went to a different service than I did. So
Mhm.
I never saw her. Very rarely did I see her. I was like, perfect. I go in and find out that she is like the summa cum laude. What is summa cum laude? When you
Mhm.
graduate, the highest
Yes.
one, not the lordy
Uh-huh.
lord, and oh my God, I made it one, but the highest one, but the highest one of therapy, therapists. And when I walked into her office, I sat down and I burst out in tears again. And I just started to cry. I was so overwhelmed. And the first thing she said is, let's pray. And I was like,
Mm.
I'm in the right place. I'm with the
Yes.
right person. I'm going to be all right. We prayed, and that was the only way that I would be able to move on because I was so emotionally upset. I mean, I was just bawling, bawling, bawling. And we prayed. And then we had our session, and I'm telling you, she helped me out so much. Therapy really works. So Michelle, that's a little bit of my story because I
Mhm.
counseling really does work, or therapy, it really does work. When you went to therapy, and did you share everything at once, or did you break it up because you were like, I ain't telling this lady all my business? Or
No.
how did you do? Because I know that there are people out there and they have a thought of how therapy is. And
Mhm.
I want them to understand by people who actually been to therapy how
Yes.
it works. I didn't dump everything on my therapist. I gave her bits and pieces because I was like, let me get to know her a little bit better.
Well, my experience was I was I was ready to go to therapy because I knew I needed help. And I had so much inside that I had not verbalized. I just needed somebody that I could go and I could say anything and everything I needed to say because I had felt so, like you say, silenced. It was a self-imposed silence, but it was a silence. It was, things that I had just not shared ever, things that I had not said. So when I first started going, I probably for the first few weeks, first month or so, I didn't know where to start because I had so much stuff. And I remember being in her office and saying, I got so much, I don't know where to start. I got so much, I got so much. And, she would just kind of, ask me, a few questions here because she was like, Lord, you're probably thinking this chick is a hot mess. But because I really did have a lot. What it ended up being for me was really a reconciliation from birth to where I was now. That was 40, 45 years worth of stuff.
Mm,
And, I went in thinking that I was just going to deal with the abuse, but it ended up, I mean, because that affects everything else. And then this happens, and then this happens, and that comes up, and this comes up. So by education and profession, I am an accountant. So I think very logical. I think in a way, I'm like, okay, how can I handle this? How can I get my mind, wrap my mind around this? So what I ended up doing is really kind of going from my childhood and talking about different things there that I had dealt with, or I had experienced that I had not dealt with, and I just kind of worked my way up through life and different types of events that I had experienced. And I think when you are picking a counselor, like you said, you wanted someone that you wouldn't be seeing
mhm,
in church. I think it's so important that you get someone that you feel safe with,
mhm,
because if you really want to resolve the things that you're going to the counselor for, you have to feel safe and you have to feel a level of comfort talking to that person. And I didn't know this woman. She didn't know me. I could go in there and say any and everything that I had never said, whether it was good, bad, indifferent. Some sessions I just cried half the time because
I know.
I just needed that outlet and I
Mhm,
felt safe in that space. And it took a while, but I really got through everything that I really needed to work through. And I just kind of, because I mean, the past we can't change. It causes us a lot of pain and a lot of
mhm.
hurt, but we can't change it. And sometimes you just need to process it. You just need to kind of be like, well, this is what happened. This is how it made me feel. And now I need to move on from it.
Right.
Sometimes you just need to be able to do that part of it. And that's kind of what I felt like I needed. I felt like I just needed somebody to hear me. I needed somebody that I could talk to, somebody that I could express myself to and feel safe. Like my stories would never get out to anybody. Nobody would ever know. I could say whatever I needed to say about whoever I needed to say it about and not have the concern about it leaking out somewhere.
Yeah. You know,
So that was
that
good.
is, yeah, that was very important that you said that you feel comfortable about it because for me, um, I knew I wasn't going to see her in service because I made sure I looked. She went to 10 o'clock. I went to 8 o'clock.
Mhm.
I was not going to see her. But one of the things you said about being comfortable and all that was because I had to fill out this intake form and I filled out this form and everything. And I sat down and after we finished praise, she looked at the form and she said, "Oh my God, you are carrying a lot." And I
Mhm.
kind of looked at her like, "What? From a piece of paper, you can tell that?" I'm like,
Mhm.
from a piece of paper. She
Yeah.
said, "Baby." And in that moment, I felt like she could feel everything that was in my heart and everything
Mhm. Yeah.
because of the words that she spoke. And from that point on, I was like, I'm going to be able to share with her
Mhm.
without worry. I can
Yeah.
share with her with ease. I don't have to worry about her saying anything. I don't have to, even if I saw her in the hallway, I don't think that I would feel as though she was like, "Oh my God, that crazy woman,"
Right.
or
Right.
something like that. So when one of the lessons that I learned, and I'm going to ask you this question, what is one of the major lessons you learned from therapy? Now, one of the major things that I shared from therapy is that she was telling me that as women, we have a capacity to carry too many things. And so she gave me the illustration of of the overhead compartment on a plane.
Mhm.
And she said, when you get on the plane, you don't carry your bag and you don't put it in your lap and sit down and, put the seatbelt on it and carry it on the flight. You put it up in a compartment.
Mhm.
And then when you get to your place, wherever you are, you take it down, you carry it with you. She said, well, that's what you need to start doing with your issues. You cannot handle all those things at one time. So what you need to do is put them in the carry-on, close it. And when you're ready to deal with it, pull it down.
Yeah.
Only deal with what you can do, whatever you can do in that moment at that time, that's
Mhm.
what you deal with. Everything else goes into the other overhead compartment.
Mhm.
It stays there, and then you pull out one thing at a time and you deal with one thing at a time. So that was one of the major things I learned from my therapist. Is there one major thing you learned from yours?
I think probably the major thing that I learned really for myself is that I was not crazy. I was okay. I
Okay.
had a lot and I had been carrying a lot and that didn't make me any less of a person, didn't make me any less of a woman. And it just validated me to have her listen to me and help me through this process. I don't think I didn't pull out everything at one time. Like I said, I had so much. That's a very good way to think of it is just pull out one thing to deal with at a time. And I think I did that to a certain extent. But for me, like I said, it was easier for me to just like start here and let's just come forward because I just once I got there and I felt free and safe. I said, well, I got this and I got that. So I may as well deal with everything at one time because I didn't want to have to go back. I wanted to deal with
Mm,
everything. I was so ready. And I think that's important too, is that you have to
mm,
be ready.
mm-hmm.
And if you're not, and that's where what you say come into play. You may want to work on one thing, but you're not quite ready to work on something else. That's okay. Everybody's story is different. Everybody's
Right.
journey is different. So whatever works for you. I don't think counselors should try to force you to work on things that you're not ready to work on. So,
Mhm.
but for me, I was open to working on everything. I just had to do it in a order that made sense to my brain.
Yeah, and you know what? One of the things I also wanted to say is that there are all different kinds of therapy.
There
There's
is.
counseling, there's also you have to really think about what you feel like you need. to
Yes.
go and get it, if you need it. Now, if you have a good friend that, you feel comfortable talking with and all that, that's great. But
Yeah.
then there are certain things that, you may go through that you actually need a professional to help you with.
Yeah.
So on your journey to healing, I know therapy was a major part of that journey.
Mhm.
For your healing, what are some of the things that you learned through the healing process about yourself? One of the things I learned about myself through my healing and all that, that everything is not my fault. It is
Oh,
not my
absolutely.
fault. Oh
Yeah.
my God. And to give people back their issues, that's your fault. You did that. That's the way you thought, that. So that was major for me. It's like,
Yes.
it's not
Yes.
all your fault, Valeria. Stop taking on other people's issues. It's not your fault. So that was one thing for me. So what was something
Yeah.
through your healing journey?
And that's the same. I learned that too. I carried the weight of the world on my shoulders, and I was more concerned about what other people thought or
Hmm.
what other people would think of me, if they knew about this or if they knew about that, or if I was really my authentic self, because I wasn't being my authentic self, because I was trying to hold on to all of this stuff. And so I learned to put myself first
Mm,
and to consider who I am and what do I want, and what's not working for me in my life at this time. And that was critical, because during my counseling journey, my marriage actually ended. I split from my husband at during it was a couple years probably after I started. I was in therapy for like 3 years. Like I said, I had a whole lifetime of stuff to deal with. And my therapist left, so I had like a few months gap, probably about 3 4 months gap, and she came back to the practice and she called me back, and I went right back into it just like she hadn't left. Because I was not finished yet, because I still had a few more years to work out. But during that time, I began to take a more realistic and honest look at my life. And like I said, the marriage got started with me being left at the altar. So that had been 20 plus years of stuff that I had held on to as well. And I really had to look at that as a whole, and where, not just what had happened back then, but where were we now? Where were
mhm.
we now? And I just really, I just had to accept the fact that I was not the best mate for him, and he was not the best mate for me. We were not we were not the partners that we should have been. And that was hard, very hard, because we tried to work on it for a few years while I was in counseling and even prior. He didn't want to go to counseling. He didn't want to go to couples counseling. And so that's just where that's where it went. And it was probably one of the first times that I had really put myself first and made
Mm,
a decision that I thought was the best for me.
like
And
that.
it was very powerful, very,
Yeah,
very powerful. It was painful,
of
but
course.
it
Yeah.
but it was powerful because I had been married at that time about 25 years. And we have one son, and it was painful for the three of us because it was something new and something different for all of us. And I didn't necessarily want my marriage to end. We had grown quite a bit from where we first started. And but it wasn't what I needed it to be.
Right.
And after trying to work on it for several years, it just didn't work out. And so I had to make that choice, because he told me he would have never left. And I'm
Oh,
like,
wow.
but I'm like, if you're not happy and I'm not happy, what are we doing? So but it was empowering because I was able to make that choice and stand in it. Whereas prior to therapy, I probably would never have been able to do that.
Right. Yeah.
So I got a sense of self. I figured out, I got a sense of who I am, and the strength that I actually carried, that I didn't realize I carried. I just felt like I was carrying everybody else's burden. But it just shed light on the strength that we have as women. We don't always realize, we don't always use our strength for ourselves. It's like
Right.
we're strong for others, and we often do for others things that we won't do for ourselves. And so, it was very key. And then also there was prayer. There was a lot of prayer. There was a lot of
Hmm.
lots of conversations with the Lord,
Yes.
and just whenever you have trauma in your life, in your body, trauma is stored in your body. And it for me, I can't say for everybody's experience, but I had to get that out of my body. And for me, I describe it kind of like poison, because it felt toxic.
Hmm.
And so one of the things that I experienced that I didn't, I know it was just the Holy Spirit working through me, was that when I would go to church, church was a place that I felt safe. So when I would be in my church service, I would just I would just sit and weep. Tears would just flow. Just
Yeah. I know.
it's like a quiet weeping. Tears would
Yes.
just flow. And I did that for, I don't know how long. I don't even remember. It had to be like probably a couple of months or so. And then I noticed one Sunday that there was no weeping.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, oh, hmm. So that was a cleansing process for me. It was a physical cleansing through the tears. And that was an interesting experience that I was not expecting, but I'm so very thankful for that.
Yeah. I know what you mean about crying and the weeping. Ooh,
Yeah.
because a cry and a weep is different. Weeping is like, ooh,
Yeah.
it's like
Yeah.
pain.
And yeah, it's and I didn't do that anywhere else. It was only in church. And
Yeah.
I say, well, it had to be because I felt the presence of the Lord, and I felt safe, and I felt like this was a place where I could leave those burdens.
Well, I have a question, and I know you have a lot of things going on, so I want to give you a chance to, tell us about the books and about, what's going on. But before I do that, for someone who's out there who's been through, some of the traumas that you've gone through, or that's gone through a whole lot, what advice would you give them? Well, let me take that back. What would you tell them about therapy to help them to turn that corner to get there? And what I mean by this question is, there are people probably like me who used to hear Black people don't go to therapy, and used to hear, all the negative things about therapy, and they have preconceived notions in their minds about therapy. What would you say? What one thing that you would say to them that maybe can convince them to go? Because I want people to get help, and I don't want them to be fearful or afraid because
Mhm.
of something that they heard, from somebody who may have never gone through therapy.
Yeah. I think it's important to drop the preconceived notions that we have
Mhm.
about therapy, about we don't do that, or Black people don't do that, or it doesn't work. Um, I would say give it a chance. Maybe talk to somebody who is willing to share their experience
Mhm. Yeah.
with counseling. Some people will willingly share, some people won't. My family didn't know I was going through therapy. Only my husband knew, because I didn't want them to know about the abuse.
Mm.
So my husband knew, but my family didn't know. Now they know. Everybody know, because I put my business out in my podcast. But at that time, so I would say, talk with somebody who has been, and they can share their experience with you. Have an open mind, or just give it a try,
Yeah.
and see, and just see how it works, because sometimes you don't know how something is until you experience it. So I would definitely, get some information. Now there's you can do therapy online. You don't have to
Mhm.
go into an office and talk to people, talk to a counselor or a therapist. Um, and it's just so much more common now, and there's so many means, there's so many outlets that people can try to get counseling. So I would certainly say keep an open mind. maybe do an online therapist, somebody that you don't even have to see. Like I said, I think it's important. I think people feel like they don't want to share their innermost stuff with a stranger, but then they also don't want to share it with people that they know because they feel like it may get, it may get out. I'd much rather share with a trained professional that I don't know, because I don't, like you say, I don't have to worry about seeing them on the street or seeing
Mhm.
them at the restaurant. And and you see them talking to whoever they're with, you think they're talking about your crazy story
Right,
that you told them last week.
right.
So I think there's that comfort in knowing that someone is trained to help you through this process. I mean, that's what their job is. And if it's someone that you don't know, that worked better for me. I wouldn't have dared to tell someone that I knew that level of myself at that
Yeah.
time, because you don't know what people are going to do with your stories. These people are trained and they have a confidentiality thing as a part of their work. So I would just suggest that people have an open mind and give it a try. It can really be helpful.
Well, one of the things I wanted to say is if you don't feel comfortable with therapy, you can go to counseling, because you do counseling and you help people. And that may be a different level where they can start. And then
Right.
you can give them those things that, because they may not be feeling comfortable with that, but they can start. But what I also wanted to say is that's the first step to you loving and taking care of yourself and putting yourself first, saying, you know what, I need help. Now I'm not ready for this, and this, but I
Mhm.
think I can do that. So
Right.
Michelle is here for you. If you do not feel comfortable or anything else, Michelle will be able to help you. She can give you some tools, some steps that you can start to take until you feel ready. Or if you never feel ready for that, at least you're getting help. So Michelle, tell us where we can find all your information. We're about to run out of time, and I hate when that happens.
Yeah.
Zoom can be rude sometimes. But anyway, tell us
Well,
where we can
let me
get
tell you what I
everything.
have. I, I you were talking about self-love,
Yes.
and I am getting ready to launch a program that's called the Self-Love Expedition. And it's really about showing women, teaching women how to put themselves first
Hmm.
in self-care, learning about their worth, being compassionate towards themselves, because we can sometimes be our own worst enemy,
Hmm.
and just discovering who we are. And that's a 12-week program. That information is available on my website, and Ms. V will have my website in the show notes, I hope.
Yes.
And I have, like I said at the beginning, I just opened an e-commerce store,
Yes.
and I wanted to offer your listeners a discount. I'm
Okay.
going to give you a discount code of Storyteller10. So anybody who goes to the esteemedshop.com and place an order before the end of February can use the Storyteller 10 discount code at checkout, and they'll get 10% off of their order.
Okay, perfect. And I'll make sure all the information is in the notes so that you can click on and get that code. You can find her on Facebook, Instagram. Her email address will be up there, so you'll be able to reach out to her, not just for those things, but also if you feel like you want somebody, you need someone to talk to. Please,
Yes.
you guys, get help. Is so much important that you get the necessary help that you need, because we want you to be healed, healthy, and happy. So thank you, Michelle, for being here. I'm telling you, I told you all, I love having these guests that come and share their stories, and that can help us and empower us and make us better. So thank you, Michelle.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Lord.